Hey guys, it's Jason Snavely, certified wildlife biologist and founder and president of Drop-Tine Wildlife Consulting, the Drop-Tine Seed Company, and of course, Drop-Tine Podcast. Guys, I've 17 years private wildlife consultant.
All right, we're back. I'm going to cut into that. You've all heard that enough. Expecting a long, super excellent podcast today with a friend, client, and just a true professional. So I'm going to get going. I want to get back to the topic that I really enjoy, and based on the show download statistics, many of you also enjoy: soil health, food plotting in nature's image, and regenerative wildlife ecology, or any other buzzword floating around today. But before I do, I'm hoping this is easier than I think it's going to be. I'd like to pay respects to a mentor of mine, past guest of the podcast, actually, who recently passed away. We lost him on September 22nd of 2022, Dr. Bruce Leopold. Dr. Leopold was a damn good man. He was a fellow conservative. He was one of the best research ecologists of all time, and quite frankly, just an overall fun educator and mentor to have. His class was also, it was known to be, or one of his classes was known to be one of the most challenging of them all. And I'll be honest, I loved every minute of it. I mean, to score a 30 or 40 in it was super good and overperforming, so it was a challenge. But Dr. Leopold was my guest in December of 2020, I think it was, when I recorded Predator Control, Here We Go Again. I'm so thankful that I had the opportunity to learn under Doc when I arrived in Starkville, Mississippi in the summer of 1997. I was about 1,029 miles from home, not that I measured it. I was a bit culture shocked for sure. As soon as I arrived, Dr. Leopold introduced himself, and he had done some homework, I guess, already. And he knew I was a Pennsylvania resident. And he was quick to tell me that he was born in Conshohocken, PA. And then he laughed when I said the name Conshohocken. He said I was the only one to ever pronounce it correctly. He served as the department head when I was there at MSU, and I was honored, when I was honored to win an award from the National Wildlife Federation. He personally drove the 45-minute drive with me to the dinner and the ceremony, and it was there that I learned how much fun Doc was to be around. Dr. Leopold, thank you for all you've done in the field of natural resources, and I know that you are managing the most perfect predator-prey system for eternity. Thank you, sir. Here's a soundbite from that podcast. If you guys haven't heard it, highly recommend it. My only regret, truthfully, is that I didn't record more with Doc.
Let's look at the habitat. You can manipulate the habitat to enhance all species, as Aldo Leopold gave. And my own doctoral student, Dr. Michael Chamberlain, his doctoral work was kind of concluding. Dr. Hurst and I had the 15-year turkey predation study. Mm-hmm. And we had virtually anything with a canine, they would slap a collar on it.
Yep.
But the one thing that Dr. Hurst hated was, as you mentioned, raccoons. Well, Dr. Chamberlain discovered that in those areas that the Forest Service had burned, that pulled the raccoon away from the preferred nesting area of the hens and the bottoms to the uplands, because the raccoons were eating all the blackberries and all the soft mass that the 1 and 2 year old fire created. Mm-hmm. So again, by simple habitat management, burning at a 2 to 3 year level rather than a 5 to 10 year level, you pulled the carnivore, the main carnivore of question, the raccoon, away from the bottomlands, the preferred nesting habitat of the hens, and you pulled them up to an area where the hens did not like to nest, but there was tons of food that the raccoon could enjoy. So again, habitat management, instead of you're going in, let's shoot all these raccoons and we'll get tons of poults. No, all you had to do was let's change the birding regime of the uplands, which can handle it because they're pirate-dominated species, pine. Mm-hmm. We got the coons away from the hens, and the hens are happy having poults. Again, another good example of answering your most recent question. And that's what Aldo Leopold was pointing to. Don't just get obsessed with killing the creature. Look at the system as a whole.
Observe, and that's one area that I want. All right, so there you go. Go back and listen to that episode. That was a good one. So this podcast, for context, we are recording this October 17th of 2022. And I guess backed by popular demand, this is more of a report from the field. You guys seem to like those, and quite frankly, they are fun to do. And, I think we've done Pennsylvania and New York, and there's a lot more I should be doing. And just as we record a field report from a specific region, they apply to everywhere else in a sense. And I think you'll hear that in today's show. I'd like you to hear it directly from those who are living it. So I think this third-party story is going to be fun to do. But anyway, so my guest today is going to provide details on his regenerative wildlife food plotting journey under conditions that are, quite frankly, as challenging as they come. While his experiences come from the great state of South Carolina, and more specifically the Piedmont landform region of South Carolina, one of my favorite areas of the country, his first-hand and recent experiences with soil health, regenerative food plotting, and just improving resources that have been, quite frankly, mismanaged for generations before him will most certainly apply, as I said, to those of you in whether it's the UP of Michigan or Pennsylvania or Wisconsin, Texas, Florida, and everywhere in between. So today we're going to zero in on a family farm in Chester County, South Carolina. We've been wanting to do this for a very long time. Chester County is located in the Piedmont landform region. As I said, the word Piedmont actually means foot of the mountains. And this beautiful, culturally rich region covers parts of South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, and Alabama, and it also stretches all the way up into Maine. In South Carolina, the Piedmont actually comprises about a third of the state. The elevation hits roughly 300 feet or so down at the fall line, and then about 1,200 feet at the base of the Blue Ridge Mountains. The Piedmont is known for its rolling hills and characteristic red clay soil, which can become rich, dark chocolate cake, believe it or not. So I could hear him laughing already. And, although my guest today probably will disagree, Chester County, just to give some of you context, receives an average of 44 inches of rain per year. With an average of about 3 to 4 inches during each of the months of January, February, and March, dipping to about 3 inches in each of the months of April and May, and then climbing steadily to about 4 inches in June, 4 inches in July, and peaking at around 4.5 inches in August. Monthly rainfall then drops back down to about 3.5 inches per month for the remainder of the year. And yes, I'll also agree that the climate in Chester County clearly has not received this memo in recent years. When you identify that you and even those before you have been doing something the wrong way and drastic change is required, you must be fully committed to the pain of that change. In other words, if the pain to change is greater than the pain itself, you will struggle. If you're not fully committed to a specific goal, then simply reinvest your efforts on something that you are fully committed to. Some may call this quitting. I call it a correction in direction and a wise use of the most important asset in life, time. Life is short. No one should waste another minute on something that doesn't bring them joy and a sense of accomplishment. Don't get me wrong, I'm not a fan of repeatedly starting endeavors with unrealistic expectations, weak or non-existing goals, not giving enough time, and simply giving up in a perpetual manner. I'm not saying quitting and joining the millions of underemployed or unemployed bums of society should be the result of your redirection efforts. What I am saying is, if you started something with realistic goals, objectives, and expectations, and you've worked your way through the various levels of due diligence, but still come to the conclusion that the sport you thought you would enjoy, the marriage you swore was forever, or the job that your guidance counselor and parents insisted was your best pathway to success isn't spiking your happy meter, as one of my clients says, it's time to redirect your efforts. Change your direction and focus on kicking ass somewhere else. Many of you are going down your own path of regenerative food plotting and looking for a better way to provide nutrient-dense nourishment to your whitetails and other wildlife. If you're like my clients, you're seeking ways to differentiate your property from your neighbors. I recently received a text from a client that contained a podcast that touched on their version of soil health and regenerative food plotting. The guest and the host offered many examples of why food plotting, like we do, doesn't work in the sandy soils of the UP of Michigan and Wisconsin. Unfortunately, these individuals are failing to learn and comprehend how nature functions. The game is played below ground. More specifically, they never once mentioned soil health indicators and life below the ground, but instead relentlessly mention above ground biomass and yield, and reveal the fact that they don't understand how the ecosystem functions through their tunnel vision approach to growing what they believe to be magazine cover food plots. The truth is, conventional farming practices are easier to do, although intensive tillage, monoculture plantings, simple and predictable crop rotations, synthetic fertilization, and pesticide applications result in a dilution effect in plants and contribute to declining nutrient density by interfering with the beneficial relationships between plants and soil life. And now, let's, after that long, lengthy monologue, let's shoot from the hip and hear from today's guest. My friend, first and foremost. Yes, he is a client of the consulting company, a customer of the seed company. I guess that's full disclosure. And he is a true professional, Dr. Tripp Leitner of Tripp Leitner Orthodontics. Tripp, you still here after all that?
I am. I'm just glad we're not talking about teeth.
Good deal.
Yeah. I'm Tripp Leitner. Have a family farm that's about 950 acres in the Piedmont area of South Carolina in Chester. It's a family property that's been our family since the early 1900s. Historically, it was farmed for cotton, as was a lot of the land here in the South. And over time, those practices just stripped the soil of all of its nutrients and character. And so kind of left with this clay substructure that we're trying to build a layer of topsoil on, or the A horizon. But yeah, I mean, it's, I think, with your intro, you said it well. There's a steep learning curve. I mean, I've got a history of, before 2015, we were tilling and broadcasting and cultipacking, and most of that was, we were planting Pennington seed Durana because it worked on our soil types, and worked really well. We would plant with chicory, and we may plant arrowleaf and crimson with wheat, but we didn't really have any summer plans as far as planting goes. In essence, we just let the fields go fallow in the summer, and the clover wouldn't sustain the hot temperatures, so it would wither until the daylight got shorter, and temperature started dropping. In 2015, I decided that I wanted to incorporate some summer plantings to try to offer more food to the wildlife instead of just letting the fields go fallow. And also was looking to try to improve some efficiencies, because at that time we went from 30 acres of plantable food plots to 60 acres. And it was just a lot of time spent in the field with the techniques that we were using. And so I actually bought a ferminator with the hopes of eliminating the broadcast step. So, there were 3 processes to our planting prior to the ferminator. And then I said, well, if I can get rid of the broadcast step, now all I have to do is till and then run the ferminator through. I was supposed to be able to run the ferminator through on its own, but that clay soil proved to be a worthy adversary of the ferminator. So we did till and use the ferminator, and it worked really well with small seeds. But it proved to not be the greatest for larger seeds like soybeans and sun hemp that we were trying to plant in the summer. And really during that time, my main goal was to have a magazine picture food plot, like you mentioned a little while ago, free of grasses, just beautiful clover stands. And so that required a lot of maintenance to achieve that, and that was done with herbicides, which I really wasn't too wild about the application of herbicides just from a health standpoint, and obviously, which was probably the most important, but then there's the time component to it. And so in 2017, I decided, well, I'll keep using the ferminator, but now I need something to get my seed in the ground in the summer. And so I started renting the drill from the NRCS. And the problem with that is that everybody in the county wants the drill at the same time. And so it's more than likely by the time you get it, you may have missed your window relative to rain and weather conditions. And so, it worked well to establish the soybeans. Everything was going great. We had great stands. I was still tilling before we would run the drill through. And so from an efficiency standpoint, it was very similar to when we used the ferminator in the fall. We would till and then run the ferminator. So in 2018, I got tired of being on the list for the drill, so I decided to buy my own. And I was looking at Great Plains and learned that Great Plains actually made Lampride's drill, but they sold it for about $2,000 less. So in this part of the country, you either pull for the Gamecocks or you pull for Clemson. I wasn't real wild about the orange on the Lampride drill, but for $2,000, I decided to deal with it. I did stick a Gamecock sticker on the side of it, though, so I figured that offset the orange. And so then I kind of simultaneously started experimenting with some fall blends that were not just arrowleaf and crimson and wheat, or Durana, chicory, and wheat, and was having some good, some pretty decent results with those multi-species blends. And then a friend of mine in 2020 told me that I should listen to Jason Snavely's podcast, and I was like, "Who is Jason Snavely?"
That was a mistake.
He was like, "It turns out it's been a very good. It was perfect timing, but." He just said, I think with your background, and he knew me really well from college, and I've got a biology degree, and I love the field biology classes and ecology, he was like, I think you're really going to be drawn to the guests that he has on his podcast and just the material that you'll hear. And he was right. I mean, I've got a 30-minute drive to work, and I would leave home and put a podcast on and wouldn't finish the whole thing. And then I'd get back in my truck to drive home and I'd cut the podcast on. And I did that day in and day out for, probably 2 months just to catch up with all the podcasts that I had not listened to. And then, I think kudos to you, the references you give with some of the books that you mentioned, on the podcast, they were a tremendous asset as well. I mean, it just struck a chord. And so I got on my email and reached out to you and said, hey, would you be willing to take a South Carolina wannabe regen guy as a client? And surprisingly, you said, yeah.
Yeah, I remember that first conversation when I started talking about the Piedmont and the A Horizon and the cotton farming, and I got done, and you were like, you just described my farm. And then I think you said you listened to, I don't know if I should probably have Steve Groff on the podcast or even record that on the podcast as well. I think you get it on YouTube or whatever, but when Steve Groff had his Cover Crop Innovators, which was a really good program, he actually sold it. And I think I was like the last episode because I was just kind of, a year or two. I had enough experience at that point in soil health and regenerative wildlife ag that Steve was intrigued with what we were doing. He was like, do you mind doing one of these innovator deals? So I did that, and somehow it's on YouTube, and I think you watched that too, which was pretty thick and in the weeds on geeking out and soil health and all that stuff. But that seemed to sort of spark kind of this whole regenerative wildlife ag thing. And I'm just curious, when you started that initial, you went to some diversity with some others. What sort of made you, other than the friend reaching out, and there's a progression or an evolution you can tell when you go through your, 2015, 2017, 2018, things are happening, things are changing. What sort of pushed you down that path?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. I mean, by nature, I just am always trying to find pitfalls and weaknesses, I guess, and try to figure out a way to do better. And I just felt like there was something, up until 2015 and then all the way up to 2020, I just felt like there was something just didn't make a lot of sense. I mean, the clover looked good, and from a wildlife standpoint, I felt like we were doing okay from a turkey harvest and deer harvest point of view. But I've just always, obviously I'm a science-minded individual by going to dental school and then orthodontic residency, and so just looking for information, I guess I would say, looking for science, and just digging, no pun intended, but digging into the weeds to try to figure out, what should I be doing? Am I doing everything I can for our habitat? Because I think, as I've told you before, I grew up hunting thanks to my dad and our family, but my passion has always been habitat. I love learning about it. When I was in college, I loved to identify trees based on leaf vein patterns and the bark and characteristics. And so science it just draws me in. And so I've seen different articles, I've listened to different podcasts, I've seen a lot of information, but for the first time, the guests that you had on, and then just your information and your knowledge base as a whole just drew me in, and it made complete sense. I mean,
okay, so
Gabe Brown.
Yeah. I'm interrupting you because I don't want this to sound like a stroke fest.
Yep.
Too kind.
Yeah. I wouldn't do that.
So how did you? Other than the bourbon and the steak. By the way, the Traeger steak that I had at camp that first night and the bourbon. I mean, just the best steak I think still to this day. Incredible. It was like 18 inches thick, and it was just prepared amazing. So anyway, how did you get started, or how did we get started? And I guess was it as sexy as the videos and the podcasts, or were there challenges?
There were definitely challenges.
Or are there?
And
there are challenges.
I still have challenges. Yeah. I mean, it's I think anything worthwhile, whether it's in personal life or in our hobbies or whatever, our businesses. I mean, anything worthwhile usually has some pretty significant pain points, and then you have to learn from those pain points. And like you said in your intro, I mean, you can, we've had some interesting conversations on the word quit. And I vaguely, or not vaguely, I succinctly remember several times texting you saying, "Don't worry, I'm not going to quit.
Yeah.
But I need you to talk me off the ledge."
Yeah.
Because the learning curve is fairly steep. I think, so I emailed you, you were coming this way to visit another client. And so you're like, well, this date works great. So I think if I remember correctly, you came in February of 2021. And I had already ordered spring reload because I'd like listening to everything. I'm like, well, I'm sold. I'm going down this route, and I'm going to try his seeds and see what happens. And, so you came and visited, everything was great. And shortly after you left, we drilled in spring reload in 2021. And about 3 weeks later, I called you back and I said, we got a problem. And you're like, what's going on? I was like, there are no plants above the ground. And you're like, can you take some pictures? And well, before that, you had asked about weather and temperatures and all this stuff. And you're like, will you take some pictures for me? And when I sent them to you, you're like, did you check to see, check your seed depth? Did you? And I was like, yeah, I think we did. I'm just learning about all this stuff. But I'm pretty sure we did. Cause I have a friend that helps me, with our planting and stuff. And so, he was like, when are you going to go out there again? I need to call you. And I was like, wow, something's really going wrong. He needs to talk to me on site. And so anyway, to get to the point, the seed trench did not close, which was an issue. And I mean, fortunately, as a client of yours, I had the advantage of having you basically on site through phone to help me triage what was going on. And there've been many times since then where I've called and said, okay, it's time to triage again. But the cool thing is through it all, through the ups and downs, and I really feel like we're turning a corner now, and just seeing some incredible change. And I think a lot of that comes from, being a consulting client, because it gives me access to you to help when a problem does arise.
Yeah, and you're making it sound like you didn't go through a bunch more hurdles. I mean, there's no quit in you, which is what I enjoy as a client. That region. People who are listening, and I've got quite a big base. I don't know about fans, but base of clients and customers in the Piedmont. So, even North Carolina, Georgia, obviously all across South Carolina. And it's a challenge, man. I mean, that those soils are a challenge. And when you've got the clay, and then you've got a client who's trying a new approach with super multi-diverse seed blends, and then a lot of times they've either got a new drill or they've rented a drill that they don't, in both cases, they don't really know it quite intimately yet. And then you get it drilled in, and obviously your climate, the rain doesn't come for weeks. And I remember us having this conversation. We were talking about resiliency, and we were like, we've got to get it to where your soils are more resilient, so you can span these gaps. Nature meant for there to be a hell of a lot more resiliency in that region in soils. Man came along and destroyed it, and those soils they would be able to handle these big gaps of no rainfall. But I remember you calling me one time saying, and you were a bit frustrated, and you were like, how am I going to build resiliency with roots in the ground if I can't get plants to grow? and again, this is, I think the listeners probably put this together, but this is only 2 full seasons, but it's intensively 2 full seasons. So in other words, I tell people all the time, you don't have to hire a consultant or know everything about soil health and how the soil ecosystem functions. You could start with diversity and just sling mud at the wall. It's probably going to take you a little bit longer, but who cares? But then you have guys like you who, obviously pay for consulting, and we spend a lot more time talking. And fortunately, you and almost all of my clients are very inquisitive. Obviously, anytime you pay for something like that, you're going to want to get the most out of it. So you are making observations. I can't be on every property, nonstop, constantly. So the feedback that you give me, hey, this is what I'm seeing. This is what I think. What do you think? That has been extremely valuable. So
yeah,
I don't know if you want to comment on any of that, but
yeah, I mean, and I think my hope for today too is to try to give some. I mean, there really are no magic bullets to this, but if you've made the mistake, I've done it, and so I think I can help, hopefully, people to get started in the right direction to some extent. I mean, yeah, the rainfall totals can be a little deceiving month to month because we don't get 0.3 of an inch every 4 days. We get 2.5 inches, and then we'll go 20 days with no rain. So the hard thing is when you get seeds in the ground, your hope is you have some rain on the front end of it and the back end of it. And usually we get one or the other, but not both. And so it does present some challenges. And I do remember when you were like, we're going to get, this resiliency is going to be a great attribute. And I was like, yeah, but I can't even get plants to grow. So what are we going to do? And the funny thing is it has gotten more resilient. I mean, over the course of 2 years, I've got somebody's beeping in. Ignore. Sorry. They should know that this is more important. So
go ahead, take it.
No. I'm good. So, I think now what I'm seeing is, like, for instance, this summer, I mean, we got the seed in the ground for summer reload, summer nourishment, squash. We planted a lot of different varieties of your blends, and I think we got it in mid-May to end of May. And then we didn't have a drop of rain until after the 4th of July. And I texted you several times, and I was like, well, I guess I just burned all that cash up. And you're like, just hold on. And sure enough, I actually ordered some more seed because I was like, well, I'm just going to re-drill when we get rain. And I ordered a little bit more seed. And sure enough, though, when those rains came in July, everything just jumped. And I was absolutely shocked because I would have thought it would have completely baked out and the insects would have, preyed on everything. And we got considering the weather pattern this summer, we got a really good stand that carried us into the fall. And now my fall plots are looking really, really strong if we can just get some more rain. But, from a resilience standpoint, my hope is if we do this again in 5 years, I'm not saying, well, if we can get some more rain, I hope that I'm saying it doesn't matter when I get rain because it's not going to matter.
Yeah.
Right?
And I've said this so many times on the podcast that those of us who are in those, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Ohio, well, parts of Ohio, New York, and there's other states. It's I don't want to say it's easy, but it's so much easier. And when I get somebody complaining about the time it takes to build resiliency and ecosystem function, I'm just like, you have no idea. You need to go to Texas or Alabama, Mississippi, parts of Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina. You've got 2 full seasons and you can already see where you're gaining ground, you're gaining traction, which is huge for that. If I tell people in other parts of the country where it's quote unquote easier, that, it's a 3-year to 4-year, whatever process before you're really sold, in some of those marginal areas, it's not any different. It just takes a little bit more time to gain traction. And quite frankly, when you start to understand that region and how it was mistreated for so long, the fact that people get upset or impatient when you say it's going to be 5 to 7 years is actually kind of comical. And it doesn't surprise me because that's how we are as humans. But the good news is once you do gain, like you're already finally starting to see, like even that last series of your fall stuff coming into your warm seasons, it's finally starting to look like what the system should look like, where you have several major plant functional groups phasing out from one growing condition or one season, warm season, phasing into cool seasons. And it's like, that's the relay cropping that we're looking for, where you're passing the baton from summer to fall and you're farming those microbes and feeding them through root growth. I think now you're going to gain traction. And when you really think about how long it's been mistreated, but for no one's fault, it's just been mistreated. It's actually quite amazing when you think that the biology can get abused for 100 years plus and then come back within 2 years. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I agree. I mean, I mentioned some of the references that you have given, relative to books, and I would tell I think the book Growing a Revolution is just eye-opening. I mean, to learn about different cultures in the history, regionally, culturally, like what was done relative to farming, and then what we're left to hold as a result. And like you said, it's no fault of anybody's, but history can teach us a lot. And sometimes it teaches us we don't want to keep doing it that same way. Again, another pain point, because to make that drastic of a change, ain't going to be easy. But it's all about your goals and aspirations. And I think paying attention to the soil health and really breaking it down. I mean, like Rick's podcast episodes, that was another attention grabber for me. Like, and I know, there was a lot of technical information, a lot of information in them, but man, that was really enlightening. And it opened my eyes to say, whew, this is, I need to peel the layers back and try to slowly start repairing the soil and nurturing the habitat. I mean, we do it with prescribed fire and dormant seasons and growing seasons, and we do it all over the landscape of our property, but we really haven't been doing it effectively in the fields where we're trying to feed wildlife or supplement feed outside of natural vegetation. And so it's just been a really, really rewarding and oftentimes frustrating process. But I think if you stick with it and you're persistent and you're patient, then good things can come of it over time. It's not going to happen overnight. And I've failed to mention, we do not supplement with fertilizer. We didn't supplement with fertilizer. You asked me, which I think you've asked several people in the past, but you asked me if I wanted to be a weaner. And I told you I did not want to be a weaner. And so we didn't wean. We just went straight to no fertilizer, no lime, we will use selectively a little bit of herbicide from time to time. And that's just because there's just some fields that no matter, they just need a little more TLC, but the whole point is the end goal is the same. So my goal on that field, just like it is on the field that I don't use herbicide on, is I want to get to where I'm not using herbicide. Mm-hmm. I may not be able to do it tomorrow, but I can tell you that I'm having to use herbicide in fewer and fewer instances.
No, I think that's a good point. A lot of people take this. I just wrote like 5 points there I wanted to talk about, and I'll focus on this one. But a lot of people say, and I know you listened to that same podcast that I was referring to in the beginning here. It was sent to me, and there were some things. I think it's fun to hear it and listen to it sometimes, and other times it's frustrating. But they were comparing wildlife food plots to agriculture. Obviously, regenerative ag starts, in production agriculture, where people are actually trying to make a profit and not lose their farm and commit suicide in the whole 9 yards, which sounds like, a worthwhile venture. And they're basically saying, you know what, this works, for some of these guys, and, they're growing monoculture anyway. So since they're not adopting, I should say, all 5 soil health principles, I'll just grab 2 of them selectively, and that's okay. And I think as far as the wiener comment, Haney wanted to make that a shirt. I don't want to make any more shirts, but in a production agricultural system, I understand completely. You have got to bridge that gap to be able to keep the farm, make money, earn a living. Have never said anything other than that. But in a wildlife ecology, a wildlife management food plot, I guess context, to me it has never made sense to wean. And the clients who want to do it are the clients who like those food plots. And I'm not making fun of this because I was once there. My family would get so pissed because we would be going out the driveway. I would throw the truck in park and run out and pull one ragweed out of my soybeans or whatever because it drove me nuts. Now ragweed is my favorite, or one of my favorite, warm season cover crops. It just doesn't get any better. Yes, ragweed, giant ragweed. So to me, it doesn't make any sense. We're trying to promote life, but yet here we are saying, well, let's keep using those products that helped us kill it. That doesn't make any sense to me. Didn't mean to go on and on about the don't be a wiener part, but it just doesn't make any sense to me at all. Yeah. So, and then
yeah.
Go Go ahead. I'll let you finish that.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, when I think 2 years ago, so summer of 2021, let's see, it's 22. Yeah, 2021 is, we were trying to figure out, okay, we got to get the seed trench closed, and then I need to make sure I've got the right coulter blades, which I do want to get into the drill.
Let's do it
at some point.
Let's do it right now. Good time.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna lose my train of thought. I'll get to it and just say I'm getting older, so I can't multitask when it's. But that summer when I planted, we kind of ran into the whole not enough rain. Things happened, and the weed profile. I didn't have a strong fall that I could crimp down. So the weed profile going into 2021 summer just got out of control, because at the first drop of rain, and I know I'm not supposed to say weeds, but it is what it is.
Say it.
But it got out of control, and I reached out to you and I was like, well, I'm going to replant, but what do I do? Because I've got natural vegetation in my fields that are 3 feet tall. And that's when, after you and I talking some, you're like, well, maybe we just, and it was only like 2 or 3 fields. You're like, maybe we just spray. And I was like, wait a minute. You're like, that was when you coached me and you said, listen, as long as you keep your end goal, you don't deviate from your end goal, we've got to get plants in the ground and we've got to be able to make these changes. And so as long as it's not a sustainable crutch, like there's nothing wrong with using it like this one time. And I didn't have to do it this year because my fall was so strong that I was able to crimp down and I had good weed control. And so
yeah, and I'll jump in and say that's the hardest part of, I think, anybody who deals with the public in their job, regardless of what it is. I was going to say hardest part of consulting, but in my world is dealing with the people component. When I see somebody who I know can have a huge impact if they stick to this in the long run, you have to. I know I've told people I hate that use every tool in the toolbox because it sounds like a cheat, but why not? If it's there, let's use it. We had gone through all the check boxes, tried to do everything right, hoped that nature would serve it up to us on a platter, which rarely happens, but it does sometimes. And then we adapted and we played defense like we had to when we had to. And truthfully, a lot of my clients, especially in different parts of the country, if they had a weed profile that tall and that robust, I would have said, that's perfect. We're rebuilding soil, because quite frankly, those weeds oftentimes are far better than anything we're going to introduce. And let's think about it. Each one of those plants throws millions or 1 million or close to of seeds, right? Regardless of what weed it is, it throws a lot of damn seeds. So now we're going to go out there and put 50 pounds of seed in the ground and expect it to look like a multi-species, incredible field of life immediately. It's just not going to happen. So that's almost a game. Well, it is a game time decision, and looking at the play call sheet and saying, at that point, I'm listening to you, and I'm seeing somebody who is extremely patient, extremely professional and knowledgeable and successful, and I'm hearing aggravation, and I'm thinking, all right, let's go to a crutch and let's pound it and make it look good so that he sticks to this in the long run. And like you said, eventually you don't need to rely on that tool as much. And I think the same way of tillage. I think there will be times when you look at, if you understand succession, you would never say that there's never an application for till. I'm not doing it willingly, and I've certainly gone through all the check boxes. But sometimes you need to reset the system so the microbial life can farm, or the plant life can farm the microbes and allow us to change. That's a whole nother podcast. Allow us to reset that system. The problem is if you say that, I already know somebody's going to email me or call me or text me and say, you're backing down. No, I'm not. It's not. It's you're managing nature just like managing a business. Sometimes you have to look at the metrics and make game time decisions. So that was like 3 of the 5 items I wanted to talk about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in 2022, we haven't used an ounce of herbicide on any of our fields. Like not one drop.
And the other interesting part, though, of there was a time last year that we used some herbicide, I believe, in a different application. And I haven't just done this in the southeast on your property. It's been a lot of them. And ironically, it's a plant that was bred and genetically engineered. I'll say bred to be robust in your part of the country. And this is a selling point historically, but it has turned out to be a weed, if you want to use the word weed. It has turned out to be a weed in a bag sold by companies like Pennington that has actually become a niche project for me where other customers, clients call and say, I need help getting rid of this crap. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah.
I think you probably know which one. And it's generally a great deer plant, in theory.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's also pertinent to make sure that that we identify which version of it that we're talking about, because I think you're referring to annual rye. I mean, perennial rye grass.
No, I was actually referring to a different one, a clover.
You're talking about just white clover?
I think you
like
mentioned
Durana?
it in the Durana.
Yeah,
There you go.
Durana,
You mentioned it in the beginning, but yes, we also. I mean, ryegrass is another one. I don't know if we have enough time.
To cover all. Be a different.
Plus, I don't want to give away all the secrets.
Yeah, well, and we did. Yeah, we because it's so hardy and durable, and it proliferates like stolen wise, the root structure in the ground, which we love roots, but when we're trying to add diversity, and you've got a monoculture of Durana, it just doesn't accept other plants because of the intertwined stolen
carpet. Well
mass.
put. Yeah. And again, that was a success for them. That's how they developed it. But after years and years of that, it became a nightmare, a challenge, required a process to introduce diversity back into that system because, as you said better than I could have, the highly stoloniferous goal was achieved, and you can't sneak a plan in there to compete otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, the drill just wouldn't, and then the plant wouldn't thrive. And so we ended up on a few of those that we tried to rehab, which we've successfully done, but we did end up spraying those. That was last fall. We sprayed before we went into it, and it didn't kill at all.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy. You don't even, if you want a Durana plot, you can spray glyphosate on it. You don't have to spend $500 on a bottle of Post, because glyphosate will not kill it unless you've got it running at a really high rate.
Yeah. And there are replacement clovers for Durana in that same conversation all across the Midwest, the Northeast, Upper Midwest, the West. So that applies everywhere else. It may not be Durana, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to talk about the drill?
I want to talk about the drill because when you sell seed, you pay attention to two things. Number one, the weather. And number two, the equipment. And if I've had this conversation with some of my seed friends, if we could rent a van and drive around the country just setting up drills, we would probably increase seed sales and customer satisfaction, because everybody, and this goes for any seed company, when it doesn't grow, it's always, I kept a seed tag. Are you having any other, clients who haven't had this lot number grow? And I'm like, what? No. And let me see. That's why, let me see pictures. Let's go through. I mean, is there a chance seed won't grow? Not really, because everything is germed. Everything is fresh. We don't take old seed, put it in with the new seed. It's 99% of the time. I mean, can there be a lower germ? Sure. But it's generally something that occurred with the weather and or the equipment. And I shouldn't say I don't know. There are a few clients who are as detail oriented as you, but man, it's a close competition. And I could think of like 2 or 3 others right now who take the drill settings to that level of like a production ag farmer would. It's I remember, I don't know if everybody listened to the Dana Trump podcast. And I know you did initially. Dana used to always tell me, I would say, yeah, I'll fix that later. No, he'd say, you need to get your ass out of that tractor and fix it right now. And I'd be like, listen, man, I've got 2 days and then I got to fly out of here. I got to go work. I don't have the time to mess with a drill. And he would say, then just put the drill in the barn, because you're wasting your time, you're wasting your money, you're wasting your seed. And it wasn't until I finally said, okay, I'll spend 2 days getting this right, fly out, fly back, and then I'll plant 3 days later, whatever. After that trench situation where your trench was not closing, you kind of took that personally and went on a mission.
I did. Yeah, I'm OCD by nature, I guess, which is why I'm an orthodontist too. But yeah, I mean, I think as I've over the last 2 years, the one variable that none of us control, which you mentioned a minute ago, is the weather. I mean, that's the most unpredictable, non-guaranteeable element to what we're trying to do. But there are a lot of things that are in our control. And so when that seed trench didn't close, I just kind of made a vow to myself. I was like, well, the things that I can impact, I'm going to have an impact in, and I'm going to try to figure it out. And then if the weather doesn't work in my favor, then it just is what it is, and we'll figure it out from there. But I would love to have a switch I could cut rain on and off. That'd be really cool, but we don't get that luxury. So
you're going to get all these emails from irrigation experts now telling you how you can do that.
Yeah, well, I'm not putting a pivot on every field. So, but I think, and thank goodness I'd listened to the podcast that you had Dana on, and I tracked Dana down, and Dana, outside of you, Dana has become my second best friend when it comes to regen processes. And so Dana and I, and with your help too, we just kind of started navigating. And the first question he asked me, he was like, well, is your drill set up right? And I was like, yeah. He was like, well, are you sure it's set up right? And I said, yeah, it is. And he said, well, did your dealer go through the initial setup and make sure that it was set up? And I was like, I don't know. He brought it out to me, and I figured that he sells farm equipment. He knows what he's doing. And so it was ready to roll. And he said, well, do me a favor and go put it on some flat ground and check and see if it's level. And So we went and found a piece of flat ground and put it on there, and sure enough, the drill wasn't level to begin with. So I can't remember. It was either the left side or the right side was high. And I've got a 706 NT. I want to make sure people hear too, it doesn't matter whether you've got a Lamprey drill, you've got a specific Lamprey drill, you've got a John Deere no-till drill or Great Plains, whatever the manufacturer. I think the biggest thing is become familiar with your drill. Like, look at the manual, try to figure out. I know a lot of us don't like looking at manuals. We just start putting screws and things and assembling. But it's really important because I think knowing your drill and what I have experienced in the last 2 years, I would say 90% of my problems came from something going on with my drill. And what I mean by that is if you buy a drill, don't just assume that it's set up correctly when it hits your hands, because a lot of these equipment dealers are used to selling really big pieces of equipment. And these smaller drills, so mine's 7 feet wide, these smaller drills are not something that they're accustomed to selling. It's not the same market as what they're used to dealing in terms of large ag production farmers. So I would definitely make sure that you've got it set up correctly. And then when it comes to trenches closing, that can be impacted by the type of coulter blades you have, which was the case in my situation. I had a non-fluted coulter blade that came on my drill, and I ended up ordering a wavy coulter blade that Lamprey makes, and it just seems to make a bigger difference in the types of soils that we have. I think the turbo. Yeah, the turbo. Yep. Yeah. But I think in time, like Dana was like, don't throw those straight blades away, because there will come a day where they will be useful to you. Once you build that soil layer there, that topsoil layer, the A horizon, you may find a need for that straight blade again. So that just points out that it is technique sensitive when it comes to what is on the equipment and what the intended purpose of each piece of equipment is. So the coulter blade's important. You suggested that I get new seed firmers because the ones that came on the drill are real flimsy, and they are. And so I ended up adding Keaton seed firmers, which made a tremendous difference to get the seed down in the trench, and make sure that it beds the seed. Because if you've got a flimsy seed bedder on your drill, then the seed's most likely just going to hit the ground and bounce out of the trench, and then you're losing the seed to soil contact and a host of other issues. So press well designs can vary. So there are straight press wheels. I have a V-shaped double wheel V-shaped press wheel that seems to work really well for us, but mine came with a 2.5 inch wide, I believe, single press wheel under each of the seed tubes, or behind each of the seed tubes.
Wasn't that you who, when you, like all of us, when you had your drill kind of spec'd out, and some of us just take what we can get, we're not really able to order. I know when I ordered mine, I was able to kind of spec it out, and depending on who you talk to and what their soil type was like and their experience with it, they would tell you one thing, and then the next guy would tell you another thing. But I think I remember feeling really bad one day because I knew you had just recently bought it, or relatively. And when I saw those press wheels, I was like, you're going to have to get the V press wheel. And then we priced them out, and you were like, you weren't happy. Wasn't that you? You weren't the only one, but I think you were. I actually heard some real frustration that day.
Yeah, I mean, that was me. I also ran, I've also run a lot of tests because I wasn't sure where my problem was coming from. And so I've also broken the drill down where I put straight coulter blades on 5 of the rows and wavy coulter blades on the other 5. And I put straight press wheels on 5 and the double V, and ran it through a field and double checked. And it's, it's a game of controls. And so you have to set your control and then have your variable and figure out, okay, which of these works better. And then it's an elimination of processes.
I think when one thing that you and I both kind of learned together, especially in your soils, is that when you look at that drill, it looks relatively simple, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when you go, okay, I have this problem, well, makes sense to make this adjustment. So then we make that adjustment, and it's like when you go to the chiropractor, and then something else is out of alignment, and you're like, oh damn. That. And Dana, I remember Dana specifically told us, do not ever do this. And one of my other clients was like, nope, he's wrong. I already did it. I'm doing it. And I was like, well, shoot, maybe I should try it too. And then you and I talked about it. So I don't know. I guess sometimes the soil, figure Dana, as knowledgeable as he is, he sits in Kansas, right?
Yep.
And the soil conditions are drastically different with, us. I mean, my clients are all from all corners of the country. So sometimes you think you have to break the rules, or do you think it's turned out that, you know what, he was right, that maybe the appearance was that it was going to fix it, but it just screwed something else up?
Yeah, absolutely. I know you're specifically talking about the down pressure spring.
Yeah, I just wanted you to say it.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that Dana is 95% of the time right. And then through conversation with him, we can figure it out by him just collecting some information from me and asking questions. Mm-hmm. I mean, he pushed us to the wavy culture blade, and he was like, this is actually supposed to be for like looser soil. And I was like, well, this straight blade's not cutting it in this clay soil. So just send me one and I'll put it on there before I buy 10 of them. Cause I think they were $80 a piece or something. Mm-hmm. And I put it on there, and sure enough, the trench started closing. And so then I called him back and I was like, send me the other 9. This was obviously before we had supply issues in this country. Mm-hmm. But now, because of the supply issues, I have a replacement for every single part on that drill.
Yeah, which is actually a really good point to make, because I started doing that for both of my drills. If I have to buy a replacement, I'm buying as many as I can get at the time, or, if it's a budget thing, then whatever. But yeah, definitely have them. I wanted to go back over what you said. When I took my turbos off and put fluteds on, and it helped me in some of my soils. But you're right. There are actually parts of one of my fields where if I could push a button and switch from fluted to turbo, I would do it. Obviously, that's not practical. Kind of mind-blowing when you think that there's that much variation in one field, and there is, and it's management related. But I have other clients who are now removing weights. Or I know you probably still have your weights from the very beginning. And I have some turbos put back on and some fluteds because I'm thinking I need to change again. So as the soil conditions change, all of that changes from the coulters back to the press wheels. Yeah.
And I mean, in keeping with the down pressure spring adjustment, I had a hole too, and we changed it when we changed out the press wheels. And I remember this summer, we had pretty good growth on our plants this summer, even though it happened late, but there were still some issues that I was just like, I'm still not getting what I want to get out of out of the whole process. And you were like, well, where's the seed? And I was like, well, it's in the seed trench and it's covered. And you were like, yeah, but like, where is it in the trench? And I was like, well, sometimes I can't even find it. And you said, is it in the sidewall by chance? And I was like, I don't know. I'll call you back. So we went and got on the tractor, and I had Jason run it, and I got behind it. And sure enough, the seed was in the trench, but it was in the sidewall of the trench. It could be either left or right.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I
Not
wonder,
a good thing.
No. And you said, is your spring setting still on hole 2? And I said, yeah. You were like, change it. I said, okay. So we changed it back to 1. And sure enough, in the grand scheme of things, Dana was right, because early on he said, don't change that spring tension. And I was like, I'm going to do it. It seems like it makes sense to have more down pressure to get my trench closed.
It does.
Well, the problem is, or the negative impact of that is that seed firmer is so strong that when you increase that tension downward, it kicks the seed. Instead of it being in the center of the trench, it buries it in the sidewall. And so when you go back to hole 1, or you decrease that spring tension.
Yep.
So I think what that should tell everybody, because everybody's drill is different. And I know I've got a friend who's got a different drill. I think what you always ask me and you stress is get off the tractor and go seed where your seed is. And it can vary from field to field. Your planting depth's going to vary. You may have to adjust your seed depth from field to field, but take a knife, dig the seed out and find it. And if it's not in the middle of that seed trench, you need to adjust something.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah, no, that was a closer. I'm glad you added that, because you and I both know guys, and there's a common friend that we have down there who farms this way. I can think of so many recently in the last 3 years where they're like, I planted, and I'm like, what, did you jump off and check seed depth? No, because I'm too old. Like, the common answer is I'm too old to get up and down. So getting out of the tractor and climbing up, I'm like, oh man, you've got to, I know it sounds like a pain in the ass, but run 50 yards, 100 yards or whatever, or a couple passes and get out there. I know I've had Joe Schweitzer on in the past, and he's got his seed depth. Joe's going to love that shout out, but he's got his measuring deal out, and he's checking, religiously, and he's been through, just like you, he's been through the same, I'm going to make sure I get this drill right. He's got, alternate parts for everything. And he's got some of the greatest stands, just thick, just incredible looking stands. And Joe's going to be on here again in the future. But so good stuff. I think that's the key with the equipment. No matter what drill you're using, is to jump out and check it. And if it's not right, take it from me, don't do it. You're not going to be happy. Just, you're better off taking I know you took a day off of work, or the rain's coming, or whatever, or you're like me, you've got to fly to Augusta tomorrow. I don't care. Just take the day, mess with it, text me, call whoever, and figure it out first.
And Jason, 2 quick points too that I think would help people. If your coulter, I learned this from Dana, but if your coulter diameter, you need to know what the coulter diameter is when you buy one new. And if it reduces by 2 inches, you need to replace that coulter blade because it's not going to be effective. And the other is, I think it's also imperative that people, for wherever they live, figure out when is best to run their drill. So, is it best if you get a half an inch of rain? Can you plant that same day? Can you plant the next day? Do you need to wait a day? Because those conditions are going to be different for everybody.
Yep.
And they're going to be different for the type of drill you're using too.
And that's going to change as you go down this path as well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually sitting back with my feet on my desk watching it rain outside. And it's just dumping. I thought I'd share that with you. Piece of cake up here,
great.
man. It's just simple. That coulter diameter, man, you're giving away too many secrets, but that coulter diameter is huge. And, if you talk to farmers, they're changing them on a regular basis just because of the pure acreage they're planting. But when you look at the kind of crap we plant into, and you look at that, crusted, nasty, hard, I have rocks that are huge. Man, after 2 seasons, you might need new coulters already, depending on how much you're planting.
Yeah.
Because you can burn.
Sure.
I know you've sent me pictures, and other guys have sent me pictures of 2 or 3 years of using it, and it's like you lay it on top of a new coulter, and sometimes it's more than 2 inches.
It looks like the bearing that should go in the new coulter.
Yep. Yeah, that's not good. All right, let's talk. Let's talk a little bit about in down there in your part of the country. What seed products do you like best, or what plant species, or what are some of your favorite play calls for certain situations? And then, do you like to customize them in any way or anything like that? Just
yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing that I can say is I'm trying to learn from you and from podcast episodes, and it makes sense to really keep good records on what you're planting and obviously when you're planting them. But the importance in keeping records of what you're planting is because, let's say in the summer I'm gonna plant summer nourishment. Well, next summer I'm probably going to plant summer reload in that same field. So I'm diversifying from year to year what's going in each field. And I think you've told me before, you're like, you don't have to do it year to year, but probably at least every 2 years, it would be good to throw them a curveball so that they're not eating from the same buffet. And I'm talking about the microbes, not the wildlife, but that the microbes are getting a different cocktail to feed on. And so
kind of like we like. It makes sense.
Yeah. And so, for me, like summer, I honestly plant a little bit of everything. I mean, I've got a pretty extensive, come my OCD again, Excel spreadsheet. And so I've got, like, this summer I had summer nourishment, summer reload, I had squatch, I had vanish. And vanish we were using on our screens primarily. And then going into fall, I've planted fall nourishment, fall reload, full draw 7, fall fuel. And then there were 3 custom. Oh yeah, I planted the Dove blend, which if anybody has a Dove field, you need to buy the Dove blend because we drilled in our fall mix, which was fall. No, it was the custom mix. We drilled it in about 2 weeks ago, and there were easily 200 to 400 doves getting out of the field. Still,
when you say, sorry, that 200 to 400, made me stop. When you say we drilled into the fall, what did you mean by that?
So we just planted green. So, I think, or I drilled the fall into the Dove blend.
Okay.
We just
wanted to make sure they got that
so we just took the drill and just drilled it in. So I have kind of experimented a little bit with crimping ahead. So essentially hooking the crimper to my loader arms. I bought a plate from IJ. What's the name of that? INJ, yeah. Because I already had a crimper, which wasn't their crimper, but they were kind enough to make a plate for me. And so I've run it on the loader and pulled the drill behind it, which efficiency-wise is great. But we just struggled a little. I mean, it felt like it was beating the tractor a lot. And then my summer, like going into last fall, the summer vegetation was so dense and so tall that I was worried about getting the seed to soil contact that I needed. And so this year we just drilled in green. So we took the crimper off the front and just hooked up the drill and drilled right into all of our summer plants, and probably 50% of them got knocked down. On a few fields, we have gone back and hooked the crimper up and crimped. And I will say that we measured it because I wanted to see the effect of crimping on plants that are already grown. And if the plant is 3 to 6 inches tall, the new growth, it had zero impact. I can't speak for anything taller than 6.
Yeah. So in other words, you planted green and then allowed the plants to germinate, grow, went back and crimped.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you're safe at 3 to 6 inches. I mean, like zero damage whatsoever.
It's frightening. It's always scary. It's the same thing like the organic soybean growers crimping rye and then or planting green and going back at V3, V4, whatever, or even further with soybeans and crimping them. It's frightening as hell because it looks like you're crushing them, but the plants are so rigorous at that point. They just bounce right up and keep on going. And I think actually it stimulates. It's kind of like a herd of bison coming through or any hoofed animal, ungulate. It actually, nature is that resilient. And if you stress it a little bit, it kicks into high gear. And I think it's actually a beneficial thing. But I love the fact that you started incorporating some plant green, some crimped, and just do every like we seem to be creatures of it's got to be all in. It's like doe harvest, right? So, obviously market hunting, not legal hunting, illegal market hunting annihilates the deer. And then when we start with reintroduction efforts, biologists start saying, hey, listen, the sacred cow approach, you cannot kill does because, that's our future population, our herd. Don't kill does. And then all of a sudden we become overpopulated. And now biologists have to backtrack, say, oh, you know what? Now we got to start killing does. It's like we can never just go halfway and find that happy medium. We have to go all in one or the other. Yeah. So when everybody saw us and others crimping this massive, like fall nourishment, for example, is one of my favorites to crimp the next year. You're laying down this shag carpet, if you will, that looks like 4 to 6 inches of vegetation. And they're like, oh, I'm going all in on that. It's not really what we want you to do. Get it? I hate the saying. It's another tool. But throw curveballs. If you crimp the field this year, plant green next year. Or if you crimp the field in the spring, plant green in the fall or whatever. Yeah. And make your own on-farm observation and become an artist. It's like I always tell you and all my clients. When you call and say, should I do A or should I do B? Well, let's do some A-B testing, as they say in the marketing world. Do both, and then you'll know in the future there might be one application where it's like a head coach has his play call sheet, right? 3rd and short, 3rd and long, 4th and 1, whatever. These are the 4 plays I'm going to call. Then when you get to that point and you're sitting there, if you're anything like me on the tractor or the side-by-side, and you're like, man, this is looking good. What should I do? I feel like I should crimp it, do half and half, then
Yeah. Well, it's just like, this year with the small seed box. And we threw the idea out and you're like, yeah, I'll get you a mix to run in the small seed box to just drop more seed in the ground. And I didn't do it everywhere. I just did it in a couple of areas and we're just going to see what it does and see the difference in not filling up the small seed box versus running it in combination with some of the other blends. But you had asked about my favorite. I mean, we had some, as a consulting client, reached out to you and said, hey, I've got some fields with that, that you already knew of, but I was like, okay, this one, has struggled for a year or two, and this one has a lot of annual ryegrass in it. And is there anything you can come up with, like customization wise, that'll put, seeds in the ground to try to hedge our bet when we go into spring and the annual ryegrass is trying to explode and take over the food plot? Or, we know we're going to plant that dove field again in the dove blend. So can you customize a pre-dove field blend that'll prime the soil this fall to be ready for that dove blend in the summer to just take off and thrive? And so it was really cool. You're like, absolutely, we'll get that together. And so, I've planted fall nourishment and fall reload and fall fuel and full draw 7, but I've also planted,
rice layer.
Yeah.
We have our own list of custom names.
Yes.
Yeah, my mix sheets are rather extensive, and I started doing that I've been doing that for other consulting clients, where this is one of the things I really like about I like small business, and small is relative. I don't know where that distinction is, but that line is, but I like the feedback. I love the feedback. And because it allows, like, we're not like the food plot, like I used to be, the food plot marketing companies where you worked with an importer and, you had to give them, hey, I'm going to need 100,000 pounds or 30,000 pounds of this. And they pre-bag it, and then you have inventory. You have to worry about selling it. You have to push that one product, whether it's a mono or a poly. You have to push it because it's what you have. And if it's left over, you have a decision to make, because you can't legally sell it without regerming it, and regerm testing costs money and all this back end stuff. Then you have companies like Green Cover that mix the old with the new, and it becomes problematic. But now that we have a small line and a large line, we can custom, and I'm not saying that we're going to ever do it online because it just doesn't make sense, but for consulting clients, or even a non-consulting client I have guys who plant 100 acres or 50 acres or whatever, and they'll text, call, or email and just say, hey, this is what's going on. This is from what I see, what I like. Can you make something else? And I think that's obviously, as other companies start to come out with, cover crop products and polyculture, diverse cocktails, they're 4, 5, 6 years behind, like Green Cover. What I enjoy is being able to respond immediately to that, communicate directly, take your feedback, and make what you want. And to me, that's the ultimate in gaining ground quickly. I mean, if you're not like, you're at a point now, you're only 2 years into it, where we're looking at previous management, we're looking at current management, we're looking at carbon nitrogen ratios, and we're looking at what do we want to do with this field next year, and oftentimes even further into that, talking about your spreadsheets and everything. It becomes complex, but if you want to, be a wiener and do that and take 5, 10 years, we're going to get there way before you. And we are changing the microorganism functional groups quicker than what you will ever get there, because we're flipping the script. For instance, when you tell me what works, what's growing, any client will say, hey, this is what's growing. It tells me what microorganism groups are there and they like it. For instance, if you have grasses, there's going to be a certain functional group of microorganism that likes grasses. So if you come in there with brassicas, they may grow, but they're not going to be nutrient dense. The deer probably aren't going to eat them. The company or the people are going to say it's because they're in the South. That's not true at all. It takes time to shift that microbial functional group, and that's really where this has gotten. And that's why, like, when guys like you say, hey, I want to get 10 acres of something in this blend, which I know because it's my blend, and this is what I want to do with it next year, that to me is where the rubber meets the road, because now you're steering, you're tweaking carbon nitrogen ratio, and you're getting feedback and making a product that is specific for that ground, and you're gaining ground so much quicker. You can just keep, you're going to do great using a general blend like Reload. But if you want to shrink 7 years to 3 years, I think like pulling the strings on a puppet is kind of what we started to do for you.
Yeah. So is that, let me ask you this, that example
Can't
you
ask
gave
questions of me.
Yeah. Yeah. We're going to flip the script.
Oh.
So on that, that brassica that is lacking nutrient density, is that where my favorite descriptor of concentrate selectors comes into play?
It absolutely is. And that's why, listen, there's so much we don't know to make it as simple as we're going to make a brassica like that. There was a podcast you and I were both sort of privy to. We're going to make a brassica that grows well in sand. Oh, come on. Yeah, this is crazy. Now you're starting to offend nature, in my opinion, at this point, right? How about you flip that around and give the soil what it wants instead of what you want it to want, right? I would hate to see how these people raise their kids. It would be, that's the kid they're counting 1, 2, 3, and they're on 9, and the kid's still, I don't know, rubbing feces on the wall or whatever the kid's doing. That's that kind of parenting. Like, you're not going at this the right way. But when you start to look at, you love that word, concentrate selector. I can't tell you how many people say, well, deer are browsers or deer are grazers, or no, they're not. When you look at the snout and the long tongue, they're very, very picky. And if anybody listened to the Provenza podcast and then a little bit of some of the others, the plant secondary compounds, that's how they medicate, that's how they diet mix, and that's how they nourish their bodies. And there's no doubt in my mind, you're stealing from my closing today, but there's no doubt in my mind that when we focus on the soils and we grow a more nutrient dense plant, you can take your yield, you can take your biomass, and you can stuff it, because a whole bunch of shit does not make up for the fact that it's junk, garbage. And like that whole brassica thing, brassicas have to, they have to freeze up or hit frost so that they go sweet and blah, blah, blah. Well, yeah, there are definitely, people are starting to shoot that or try to shoot that down. The plants go through a lot of changes throughout their growth phase. And to infer that we know anything about any of that, that's like, somebody along the line somewhere with some kind of credentials must have said that brassicas are non-mycorrhizal. And that does not appear to be true if you look at the research. So, anyway, that was my long-winded version of your question.
And I think in summary with all this, I think one of the most appealing parts to, and I'm not plugging your seed just to plug your seed, even though I'm a client and I'm a friend, but
I charge you full price, by the way.
You do. Yeah. But there's a reason.
A lot of times twice.
Yeah. Sometimes you charge me for rain too. I get an invoice that says that'll be $1 million for that rain that you just got.
Yeah. I told you I was going to do a rain dance, and sure enough, you got hammered. So I sent you like a $1.7 million invoice, which I thought was fair. I don't know.
I would have paid it for that to get that rain. No, but I mean the attention to detail and the research that you put into speccing your blends. I mean, like, I've talked to a buddy of mine, Mark, and we've talked about that several times. And he was a biology major at the same college that I went to, and is in
Clemson
habitat. No, well, the Citadel, actually the better college of all colleges in South Carolina. It was a military college, but you wouldn't know that if you saw my hair and and hung out with me, you wouldn't have a clue that I went to military college. But just the diligence that you look at every plant, every single seed that's in your blends is handpicked for a certain purpose. It's not just I'm gonna throw 3 varieties of sorghums in here, and let's just throw in a couple of different millets and maybe some sun hemp and a sunflower here and there. Like, there is intention and there's purpose, and that, in a nutshell, that you can say scientific approach or exacting approach, like that appeals to me because I know that it's not done on a whim. And so I see credibility in that. And that gives me comfort when I'm making the leap to start saying, hey, I'm going to do things differently than I used to do. But if I'm going to do it, I don't need to be doing it on a whim. I need somebody to say, hey, your ground needs this. These microbes need this. The deer are going to select for different compounds and different things based on their need. The turkeys are going to do the same thing. I mean, it resonates because that's what I do. Like, I love growing tomatoes at my house. I can't stand a store-bought tomato because it tastes like cardboard to me. And I can distinctly tell a difference in the tomatoes that I grow in my backyard. So can my wife. So that's not a biased opinion. It is true. I mean, it tastes different, and I would much rather have that fruit that grew in my backyard than what is on a shelf in a grocery store. And you can't tell me that the same doesn't happen with all these different varieties and the plants that we're selecting for, to try to give the wildlife that's out there options based on whatever they need. It's not just just eat this clover leaf.
Yeah, well, I think you listened to that. No, that's good stuff. You listened to that same podcast I listened to, and we sort of shared, I think, a conversation and a half on it. And that's when we got into that quitting conversation, and when it's okay to quit. But when you listen to why some people dog it, and you hear that you can tell that they don't understand the system and how it works, and everything they say refers to above ground growth, and they're not referring to anything below ground, you know that they're quitting for all the wrong reasons. And that's okay. If they're just not enjoying it, they're not digging it, and they think it's for others, that's fine. But you should never sell it to other people as a system that does not work in Michigan or Wisconsin or Florida or Georgia or wherever. It's not working because you don't understand the system. Kind of like being able to bench press 375 pounds. I have not been able to do that because I didn't play it out and understand truly what I need to do to get to that point. And I didn't put the time in and stick to it because it's just not a worth it thing for me because I have a tractor and stuff that will do it for me. So I think when I listen to a podcast like that, and I'm not on social media or anti-social media, actually considering getting back on. I can't wait to get emails about that one from a business perspective because it's fun. But I'm sure people talk about it in that regard as well. It doesn't work in sandy soils. It doesn't work in this part of the country, or, but they didn't understand the system. Like when I hear a guy say that he talked to Gabe Brown first, but then 2 minutes later, 3 minutes later, he's talking about yield and how important biomass and yield are, and never once mentions anything about nutrient density, soil health, and soil actually growing good tomatoes or anything that deer will eat. And that's the other thing is, a lot of people, some of the first calls I take about reload and this method is they say to me, I just ordered a bag from you or 3 bags or whatever. Why? Did you mean to put brassicas in my warm season blend in Alabama? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Well, deer don't eat them. Well, I don't care. It's not my intention. I hope deer don't eat it. In fact, that's why I like ragweed so much. I know I'm going to get emails from people that deer eat ragweed. I know they will. There's so many variables in the nutritional needs of a deer, the medicinal needs of a deer, and the soil conditions, and then availability plays into that based on what deer will eat. I raised a doe who ate ferns. She absolutely loved ferns. I don't know why, but she did. I stood there and watched her. But then I've heard biologists in my own state say, this hemlock stand is a biological desert full of ferns. You need to cut it. I would agree with them, but then they would say deer do not. I've never seen a deer, never met a deer that ate ferns. Now, she wouldn't eat 12 acres of ferns for sure, but she would. She obviously got something or sought something in those ferns. So, no, I'm not necessarily putting a plant species or functional group in the blend because I think a deer will eat it. Oftentimes, I'm actually hoping or I'm picking plants that they don't eat. Can't wait till the next guy repeats that on a podcast because of what it does in the blend for a different plant or for a microbe. Because plants farm microbes. Plants change the microbial, as I said, microbial functional group. If you don't believe me, study succession. We learned about that. I know you learned about succession at the Citadel formally. That's that interaction of plants and microbes. So,
Yeah.
good stuff.
Yeah. Awesome.
It gets even better over bourbon.
That it does.
All right, man. Well, we've been going for, I don't know. This might be one of the longest, pushing the longest podcast. Do you have anything else that, I know you are a copious note taker.
I am.
You've got a note list there. It's a mile long.
Yeah. No, I mean, I asked you if you wanted to split this up into two.
No, my intention was actually to have a guest host or co-host with me, who is actually a client, but he's kind of waiting on retirement to spend more time doing it. So I think now that you have been a guest, you can come back. Everybody will know you as a guest already, and give that that perspective from that part of the country, which is what I enjoy, because when you're talking to a guy from Indiana or Pennsylvania and you're talking about spring planting and soil temperatures, and he's like, hey man, I started planting my stuff, once the soil temperatures hit 40, 45 degrees, some years in February, March, I'm planting. And then you have a guy down south who's like, yeah, my soils go from 40 to 65 in 2 weeks. Take that. Like where am I going to fit spring reload in? Like that's probably pretty accurate some years on your soil temperatures down there. There's there's no spring. It just, hey, it's 42. Oh crap, it's 66.
Yeah.
Right. And we've just put in a cool season. And that's one thing I've always liked about my formal background and then desire to go all over the country and work is like when we're talking about the Piedmont, especially from that Augusta up to you is one of my favorite places to manage because so few people understand the intricacies of doing it. And I learned from people like you too. But that's what I love about doing what I do is traveling around and understanding the differences from region to region.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, you've got some definite challenges. And I think the reason we wanted to have you on was because we both were like, all right, this has been several months. We've been wanting to do this, but it just got better and better the longer you got into it because you wanted to quit. And then you said, I'm not going to quit. And you're like, this sucks. If it's not going to rain, I'm not going to grow anything. and I was like, we should have that podcast. And you were like, yeah, but you know what? This is getting better because now we're gaining ground and I'm going to have more to talk about.
Somewhere in there, I think I said, I just drank a whole handle of Buffalo Trace last night because of my fields.
Yeah. Yeah. That was 2 or 3 times, I think. So I enjoy it. I do enjoy awesome. The context and the perspective for those people in that part of the country. And, now we can drop into the lower coastal plains and talk about, other mountainous regions. And I know, another area where clients get frustrated commonly is in Wisconsin, Michigan. And we actually, Michigan and Wisconsin are two of our top states actually for seed sales. The seeds do great there, just as they do everywhere else. And the system does great there, but the soils, because, of how things formed, are the plant material or the parent material is definitely a challenge, kind of like it is for you. But the human aspect and the way that human beings changed the landscape down there for you has made it exponentially harder. So kudos to you for sticking to it. Sticking with
just like it's just like we said, we're trying to trying to get the habitat to become more resilient. And I think resilience is a great word that also applies to when you start actually dipping your toe into this, type of management. You're going to have to be resilient too, because you're going to get knocked down a little bit and you're going to have to weather some things. But,
well, I think it helps too to have a support. I know you've got that tech support group that you're a part of. And those are some great guys, and a lot of them buy seed, and some of them don't get out of their tractor to check the seed depth. Bill, not to mention any names, but Bill. I know
maybe
Bill's
he'll do it now. Yeah,
I'm gonna get.
It is good. I mean, it's good to have He's he lets water roll off his back like a duck.
Yeah.
So he'll be fine. I think just having some, people that you can, a support network that, like, especially regionally, like, okay, what are you experiencing? You're only 45 minutes away from me, but your weather could be vastly different than me. Like, are you getting seed in the ground? Are you holding off? Are you crimping? Are you going to just drill, plant green? Like, what are you doing? And I think that if you can find that in the, area that you live in, I think it can be helpful.
Yeah, I have a friend near Lawrence who, just like you said, having a support network. I've got people who are, into cattle and you name it. Obviously, production ag, monoculture, beans, corn, whatever, alfalfa, who I will talk to, which is really cool because they're like, hey, listen, I can't grow this without the deer devouring it. And of course, I'm like, what time of year? What are the soil conditions? I have seen Chester County soil and heard stories from this particular friend of mine near Lawrence sharing his soil with people. And they're like, wait a minute. I thought Chester County was in that red clay region. He's like, it is, but this is what happens when you rebuild it and put life carbon back into it. So that kind of keeps me going as well. As a consultant, and I can feel good about telling you, hey, suck it up, move on. Let's do it again tomorrow.
Don't be a wiener.
That's right. And I just got an email from Traeger. They've got a new hot sauce. It's the jalapeno and lime. So I expect you to have that in February or March or whenever I'm coming down there.
All right. I'll have it. That along with bourbon's probably more important.
Yeah, I quit drinking. I don't drink anymore.
Well, yeah. Don't be a quitter, Jason.
All right. What else? Anything else that we missed?
Nah, I think we covered.
Good deal.
Covered a lot. Yeah.
Good deal. I'll have you back on. Maybe you'll guest. I want to do this. I've had clients who want to help. Like sometimes it's nice having another host. Or I'm sorry. Me. What am I?
Yeah.
Yeah, another me. Which we don't need in this world, but it's kind of neat having that different perspective from somebody who actually does it like you and spends money and time doing it. So appreciate your time. Appreciate you being on.
Thanks for having me, man.
And I know the listeners, again, it doesn't matter. They don't have to be in South Carolina or Georgia to benefit from the drill conversations and really any of it, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So, well, very good. All right, man, I'm going to hit my conclusion, wrap it up, and appreciate you for being there. You can sit there and listen and fall asleep, or you can hang up and enjoy life. But I know you're at the farm, so get some work done. But all right, well, I want to thank Trip and everyone, of course, for listening again. I know the field reports are some of the most popular podcasts, I think, because, again, you get to hear it from someone other than me, and hopefully if you're in that region, it hits close to home for you. But honestly, until we start to see nature from nature's perspective, we're still going to struggle. And that's kind of what I'm hearing all across the board as others follow this path. So I would encourage you to first take the time to understand how nature really works, not how the system has, the educational system has taught us and the synthetic system has taught us. Regenerative food plotting and soil health, which in my mind is really just farming in nature's image, is not a fad or a craze unless you plan to quit and redirect to a different approach or fad or craze. As for me and my clients and customers of the seed company, the Drop-Tine seed company, we have observed that while the conventional food plotting system may have been easier at times, deer most definitely prefer plants from healthier, biologically rich soils. If you're judging your food plots based on their appearance and biomass, you're missing the boat. Healthy soils are the foundation of every ecosystem. Plants farm microbes. I know I said that a few times in this podcast, and you might be thinking, what the hell is he saying? We will cover more of that in the future. And conversely, plants absolutely farm the dirt. Thanks for listening.